Welcome everyone to our first, hopefully not last, symposium on technology and culture, and this one specifically on multicultural algorithms in Australia. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge and pay a respect to the Gadigal people on whose unceded land in our country we're meeting. This land is stolen and always was and always be Aboriginal land. And when we tell stories today and try to make sense of what matters to us, we should also remember that cultures and language of First People in Australia are still pushed down by the dominant narrative of what Australia is often imagined to be, which is forcefully monolingual, forcefully monocultural, despite its rich history and present. So with that, I will tell you a little bit of how this symposium came about. So it started really, and just an announcement. So Jeder Goggin, our presenter after our keynote speaker, Crystal Abidin, he fell ill, so he cannot come today. So we're gonna do a little bit of reshuffle. But it's really, Jeder gave me that idea that was put in place in our reading group with different colleagues from the School of Cultures and Languages. And we were talking about the algorithm, and the algorithm at this sort of like black box that nobody really knew about it. And the more we read, the more we thought about what the algorithm was, we started thinking of the algorithm in terms of more of a metaphor, something that was less of a thing and more of an idea. And then that idea also has material consequences, and it shows up in the world and has different expressions from different viewpoints. And one of the viewpoints that we started to explore was the user and how the user was thought by tech companies, but by the user themselves, how the users were thinking of themselves, how they were manipulating sometimes the platforms that they were interacting with. And then we started, the more we got into it and reading and discussing, we realized that this user tended to be very monolingual. It was thought out as monolingual, but in fact, it was actually quite multicultural. It has different expressions. It came from different backgrounds. And then a colleague of ours, Fernanda Peñalosa, who was here, she came up with the idea of, well, it seems like the algorithm is not really an algorithm, but an Anglorithm. And it's very Anglo in that way. And then the more we thought about it, was okay, so it seems like there is something in here that we can further explore. And then talking to Jerry, he told me, well, you know about all these different scholars who have been actually working on this for a long, long time. And then he gave me a few names and I started contacting people, and then they were graciously enough to accept my invitation. And here we have a panel a day that is really full of kind of the brightest minds in the country, if not internationally. And these scholars have been looking at the algorithm and social media and different type of online interactions from the multicultural milieu. And our first keynote will be Crystal Abidin, and then Gerard won't be able to present, sadly. So we will have Sukumani instead of Jared, but that also means that we'll have a little bit more time for a Q&A. And I wanted to say a little bit more about that later on, about how the Q&A is gonna work, but I don't wanna take too much time. So yeah, it seems like at the end, so we will have then Crystal, then Sukumani, then we'll have a lunch break, then we will have Amelia, and our industry panel will come at the end. And let's see how we go with Q&A. So if it seems like the Q&A is going well, we might be able to extend it a little bit. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But before I go into Crystal, I'd like as our head of a school, Jishilu, to give a few words, because she's also being instrumental in supporting our reading and research group. And with the funding of the school and the support, this thing basically couldn't exist. So Jishu, you.
Thanks, Ruben. I would also like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded land of Gadigal people. let us pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And thanks Ruben and the research group for organizing this important, to me personally, because I don't know anything about it, very important and topical issue of multicultural algorithm in Australia. I think it's a social phenomenon, a social reality, which hasn't been studied enough. It's such an important part of our life. And I would like also to welcome our keynote speakers and also speakers from other universities, our partner universities, and also colleagues from other schools. In the School of Languages and Cultures, we try to give as much support to good ideas, good research ideas, and to see whether that can, sprung up and bear fruit. And I'm really grateful for Ruben's leadership and also Fernanda and other colleagues in this research group on technology and culture from a very, very small start, growing up. So if anything this school can do is to provide more support for this very important research which need to be done. And without further ado, I welcome you all and wish you a very fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
I'm just going to introduce our keynote speaker, Crystal Abidin. She's an anthropologist and an ethnographer of internet cultures. She, especially in the Asia Pacific region. She's a professor of internet studies at Curtin University, the founding director of the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab, and founder of the TikTok Cultures Research Network. Her forthcoming books, arising from her recently concluded DECRA, are TikTok Youth Cultures from Emerald, Provoking Online Drama, How Attention Economies Are Changing with Jean Lee from Bloomsbury, Child Influencers, How Children Become Entangled with Social Media from Polity, and Intercultural Influencers, Global Arbiters of Norms and Nuance from Polity Soon. And you can reach her at wishchrist.com. So without further ado, present to you, Crystal. Do you want to have this?
Hi, everyone. Can I check that you can hear me? Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your attendance, and thank you, Ruben, for kindly bringing me over with your generosity. I live and work in Western Australia, and my campus and my place of residence is based in the land of the Wajan Nunggak people, so I do want to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. You will also see a few line drawings in today's slides, very kindly provided by a very talented team of RAs, so I do want to acknowledge them as well. And last but not least, a lot of the research work you see here was not done by me in isolation. I benefited from a lot of conversation with people in real life, on TikTok, online, so I do also want to pay homage to this beautiful community that is the TCRN. Without further ado, like all good lecturers, I'm going to start with homework. So if you've got a good memory or a pen or a phone, could you please get that out? We're going to jot down 3 questions. There'll be helpful questions to ask if during the Q&A it gets awkward and there's nobody who wants to ask anything. It'll be helpful questions for you to sit there and evaluate, was this presentation good? Was it worth your while? Was there any takeaway intellectually? And there'll also be helpful questions for us to think, how relevant is this to the theme that Ruben very thoughtfully curated? We ready? Question 1. Who is dominating the narrative? Question 2. Who is missing from the narrative? And question 3 is a bit of evangelism. How can ethnography help us see? Okay, so I decided, given the beautiful topic today, we are going to simulate an algorithm. In other words, whatever you decide in your interactions with me will decide what the next slide is, what the next conversation will be, what the next Q&A might be, And even though the slide deck in different portions are exactly the same, the story I'm going to tell you is different. It might be a picture of a group of informants, but I might tell a different tale. It might be a TikTok, but I pull out a different snippet. It might be a concept, but I could apply it differently based on your past decision, what I've told you previously, and the options that are to come next. So here are your options for today. Your menu, based on this very generous algorithm provider, are these 8 items. I'm going to play the role of the platform serving you content. Ruben, you're going to be the moderator. You are also the platform owner. So if at any time this goes haywire and you want to interrupt, you do that. But that also means that all of you in the room who's the audience, you're beholden to the moderator. If you make a selection and they say no, too bad for us. If you make a selection and decide to edit it or go back, or if I say there are 2 options, you can only pick one, but they choose to pick 2, then anything goes. In the real world situation of this classroom, we've got 90 minutes. It's the moderator's problem if we go over time. So while he has the power to veto any of these, the responsibility of the consequences also falls on him. So if I run over time and never make it to slide 10, or if you never get your question answered, the responsibility falls also on the person who has the power. Wonderful metaphor for how we work with tech. So are you ready for your first adventure? Please choose your introduction. Would you like to hear about Wish Chris, a person who is a digital anthropologist? Or would you like to hear about the TikTok Cultures Research Network? The way we would do this is semi-democratically. I'll wait for the first 5 responses and we'll go with the majority. So if we've got 3 in a row that say the same thing or 3 out of the first 5, that's the one we're going to pick. So shout out your answer, don't be shy. Go with Wish Chris or TCRN, Wish Chris or TikTok. Yes. Sorry, Wish Chris person. All right, you have selected TCRN. And as you know, when you like a button, your wish is granted. Enter TCRN. The TikTok Cultures Research Network was established in 2020, quite late if you think about it, given that its predecessor platform Musical.ly and its predecessor platforms all across China were already prolific and proliferating in the mid-2010s. It originally started out as a portal just to share scholarly resources, to talk about research projects from Australian academics in the region, but also to hold events to connect scholars. Those of us who've got memory might remember 2020 was also the time of the pandemic. So there were a lot of people suddenly coming onto TikTok out of boredom, out of parental obligations, or because it was just the newest app to explore and research was burgeoning in this area. Eventually, this space grew, and I was very lucky to be able to get funding from a few different sources, really consolidate what we wanted to look at, put together a team of founding members from the APAC region, supplement that with global leaders to help us think about how to decolonize our research. And we agreed that in order to leverage on our strength as qualitative scholars, as people trained in ethnography, with people who are interested in the things that make humans humans, rather than big tech scientists or tech bros throwing us cash, dollars, and stats. The 6 that we'll focus on are digital production and economies, the subaltern and subcultures, race and ethnicity, gender sexuality, governance politics, methodologies, and pedagogies. So because you have chosen this option, the consequence for the rest of the morning is that all the case studies you see will now focus less on me as the ethnographer and more on how they function in the ecology of TikTok. If you'd like to find out more, here are a few more snippets. We have been holding events quite regularly. Since 2020, we've held 10 so far, 2 satellites and 8 based at Curtin, the most recent one being TikTok Cultures in Korea in September. And of course, given that a lot of the academics that participate in these events are young junior scholars, we wanted to make sure that there is also value in ensuring that their presentations are converted into scholarly output valued by the more traditional economies and academies. So these are the special issues we have in the works. At the same time, a lot of our work also focuses on speaking back to industry. So we've had to think about different formats of outputs to talk to people, whether these be high schoolers, actual people who work in TikTok across the 10 companies, or people in government who need to make decisions about what exactly the issue is when they decide to ban an app, or what exactly their concern is when, on the one hand, politicians are politicking on social media like TikTok, but on the other hand, they claim that we need to save young people from the activism on that space. So here are a few more examples if you'd like to find out about the work we've contributed to, and you can now make your next decision. The second part of this is going to be a bit more intensive. For the benefit of the HDRs and the junior scholars in the room, we're going to have a mini crash course talking about some theory and some concepts. And you've got two choices. We can be nerds about ethnography and go through some of the key principles and how they apply to TikTok, or we can go straight into TikTok, the platform itself, to understand how it's situated in the current context and climate of society today. So we either nerd out about the method or we nerd out about the state of the world. Both are equally depressing depending on what you pick. Make your choice. First five. Moderator. We have been vetoed. Your moderator has vetoed everyone in the room, so this heart is for you. On ethnography. All right, the next 4 slides are going to be very quick because this is not meant to be a masterclass or a lecture, but I understand from Ruben that we've got HDRs in the room who are specializing in TikTok and Douyin specifically. I want to pick on a few basic principles of digital ethnography that are especially important to consider in the space of TikTok. 1, how does something become a culture on TikTok? We tend to imagine that something is a culture because a group of people experience it, we share it, we believe it, we see the thing happening, and we're all experiencing somewhat of a similar status or outcome. So if you watch a football match, clearly everybody in the stadium knows which the winning team is, even though that might be debatable. There is a clear outcome. If you live in a country, depending on the government and the opposition, after every elections, despite there being disgruntled people, there is an outcome that paints the landscape of society and your general beliefs. When you're in a space like TikTok, it's very hard to get a lay of the land because you generally don't get to see what the overview is. You rarely get a bird's eye view. Even the people who work in the TikTok headquarters are split across 10 countries, and they all work on regional markets. So when we speak of cultural relativism as an ethnographer, this cannot be more relevant than a space like TikTok because everything is relative. If you were to open your TikTok now and I were to do the same, based on our past interactions with our feeds, we might be experiencing 2 different things. If I were here and my cousin in Japan were to put in the same keyword and search, our top 10 results would not be the same at all, even if it was word for word the same, because it's all relative. And this is by design of your past footprints, of your metadata you've put in, of more specifically your geolocation as well, and the profiles and the feeds of the people who are in your mutual network. Another thing to keep in mind regarding cultures on TikTok is that sometimes they're over magnified. I'm not sure if you really catch this, but most of the time in Australia, something becomes a thing, a big deal, a scandal on TikTok because the reporter tells us so. Because there's a news article, a radio show, a podcast that says, do you know this is a thing on TikTok? And it doesn't matter if it's 10 or 100 or 1,000 people. When it reaches that level of visibility, people believe it to be a culture in that space. We used to be able to talk about culture, subculture, counterculture, and the like. But in a space like TikTok, where the algorithm can switch at a whim, and when people are very happy, nestled in their silos, the magnitude and size of your culture may be less important. Another thing to highlight with this is reflexivity. Who are you on TikTok? I don't know if you are a person who's grown up in the age of forums or blogs or Tumblr or Facebook, but back in the day, it was not uncommon for people to have very fragmented internet identities. You could have this closet life here, use this for dating, use this for religious wandering, etc. A space like TikTok collapses all of that into a single stream, which forces you to jolt out of each of these persona. A lot of communication scholars like to refer to this as the context collapse, But for people on TikTok, this can be a moment of pause and reflexivity to ask if you're a sum of all your silos the algorithm tells you, or if you're embarrassed of any of these, if they appear on your feed and you feel they shouldn't be there. There are many different ways you can apply digital ethnography into a space like TikTok. To do it properly, I feel, as an anthropologist who clearly wants to focus on ethnography, these are 3 must-dos. For one, it's difficult to talk about an ethnography of TikTok without it being multi-sited. Most people who choose a more contained project might follow a group of users, a hashtag, a sound, but ethnography that is done well generally uses a lot of triangulation through multiple sites. You combine perspectives. And this is very important because where you are in the room and how you see depends on what you see. If you're in the front here, perhaps I'm moving a lot, it may seem like I'm nervous. If you're at the side and you see that I'm moving because I'm getting to all my materials, the mic, the timer, then you know it's functional. If you're at the back and you see me moving, you might think it's because I'm kind and wanting to make sure you can see me. Same action, 3 viewpoints, 3 perspectives. It's not too different in society. Feminist scholarship talks about this as standpoint theory. Where are you in the space? How does that affect where you are in the hierarchy, in power relations? How does that affect when you see up, when you see down, how much perspective you can get? And depending on which of the methods you choose from digital ethnography, these also change. For anyone who might like to dive into this for the first time, here is a list of keywords that could start you off as your starter dough for doing ethnography in terms of snowballing your lit review. And if you really, really want to get started on how to do your first digital ethnography, here's a really good paper I love to recommend from 2 colleagues of mine. Find 6 things or one of 6 things that you might be able to follow. This is adapted from their original work looking at the Spanish civil movement, but in a space like social media, any of these 6 might be relevant. Now, before I entered TikTok as a space, I needed to make sure I had an option, an array of options for me to know where I can possibly stand. And part of that work involves mapping out the industry. If I am a TikToker in the center, who else is in my milieu? We often only think of followers because followers equals views equals money. But what about everything in between? The clients who actually provide the cash and incentives, who are really controlling the heartbeat of all the views? How about the people on the back end, industry folks who've got the invisible hand to tweak things? How about people who are loud and sometimes a bit helpless, the governments who put out regulations without really studying the needs of specific people? How about other competing platforms? Where is TikTok in this map? Where do I want to stand before I make a stance? So to let you know how I'm doing the rest of my research, I'm going to give you 3 quick peeks into what this ethnography looks like. The first is reading TikTok. If you were to see a typical screen like that on TikTok, here are most of the emblems. A few of them have been updated recently, like the live feed and DM feed. But these are small little icons and features on the app that allow you to know a little bit more about this user or this post with more metadata. You could find out about how to search on TikTok and what does that mean. How do you navigate the search bar? Why does it give you a mixture of genres and formats? What do these indicators mean in terms of the weight of your search results? And finally, entering TikTok. Supposing you have already successfully groomed your TikTok and groomed your algorithm, where do you start if you want to start looking at a silo? Could you map global milestones and look at the feeds coming in? Do you want to just start with a systematic hashtag search? Do you want to do hashtag collation, hashtag analysis, or look for templates like memes and formats? To find out a bit more, the rest of what I'm going to be sharing today is informed by a new methodology pioneered by scholars from 2020, including likes of Peter Forberg and Angelique Christie, who call this algorithmic ethnography, or the ethnography of how algorithms work and how they're perceived by people who use these platforms. This is one example of how these algorithms have worked. Young people on TikTok trying to increase their visibility from human eyeballs, but deflect the visibility from machine vision. This young person, Feroza Aziz, appears like she's doing a makeup tutorial. In fact, for the whole video, not only is she priming her eyelashes, she's drawing her brows and her lips. At that point, there were not yet closed captions on TikTok. So unless you are a person of hearing, you would not be able to know that her speech was not matching her actions. She was telling people, listen to what I'm saying. Don't put any of these words I'm saying in the comments function. We don't want them to see it. And she continued the rest of her speech, telling people about the realities of Muslim Uyghurs in China and the genocide that they were facing. Now, obviously, this was a very clever trick. It was known as the social justice makeup tutorial, and it went viral on the app. Not long after, machine vision caught up, her video was taken down, there was international widespread outcry, the video was reinstated due to a machine error, and this makeup social justice tutorial became a bona fide template on TikTok. In other spaces, TikTok algorithms work because we are hate watching or curiously watching rather than effectively watching. Now, when I'm on the plane, the section I go to the most is reality TV. The episodes are short. If I miss a conversation, it doesn't matter. And it evokes a type of reaction in me where I want to watch because I can't believe this is the life of other people in the top 1%. I'm not watching it because I like it. I'm watching it because I can't stop watching it out of sheer disgust or affect that's more negative. People on TikTok sometimes do that. People on TikTok sometimes do something more tricky, as in the case of this. What you see there is a spaceship where the caption has very carefully neglected to mention that that's happening, leaving people in the comment section to negotiate. Did you see that? Am I seeing things? Does he know? Did we catch something on camera? Sometimes it's a spaceship, sometimes it's a ghost, sometimes it's a shadow, sometimes it's a person that's mispronouncing a word purposefully, like lingerie, which happens a lot in Australian TikTok. Sometimes it's fingerprints, sometimes it's a cup moving in the background, sometimes it's a person who's intentionally misspelled something in the captions because you cannot help but run to the comments and correct them. All of this may mean something different to you and the effect that you hold, but to the platform and to the algorithm, an engagement is an engagement, so it still counts and it's still positive. Now, these ways of seeing are not new. Way before the internet, there were already a lot of subcultures and communities who were giving out these flares to deflect people's attentions or to hide messages in plain sight, such as the meaning of colored bandanas on either side of your pocket, or the meaning of carabiners, the number of them, the color of them, and what these mean to gay men and lesbian women when they navigate these spaces in society. What has simply happened in the internet age is an update of how we are using the small features, the small nuggets, but in a social media space to game how machines see us and how we see ourselves through machines. That has been your crash course. We will now continue. Now, the next decision we have to make is whether or not we would like to continue with what cultures do TikTok algorithms foster. If we go ahead with this, we will do it. If we don't, the option is to skip ahead to TikTok cultures in Australia. Number 5 gives us a background for the value of thinking about algorithms in a specific social media space and how that can produce some productive or abrasive outcomes for people in that space. Number 6 gives us an overview of the policies that are specific to TikTok users in Australia. So you can make your decision. My friends have chosen. Your wish is granted. What cultures do TikTok algorithms foster? So after having given you all that background and the brief and the methodology, here are the potentials, but maybe also some of the pitfalls if they fall into the hands of the wrong people with bad intentions. There is the phenomenon of absurd visibility on TikTok. Now, years ago, and in internet time, when I say years ago, I probably mean last year, Years ago, we used to think about people on the internet with a lot of power and influence as people with prowess, with knowledge, with persuasive power. Generally, they have got a high following on social media as influencers or internet visibility. Maybe because we like them, maybe because they're good at garnering scandal, maybe because they're good at provoking attention. But in all of these instances, the focus is on the person and the quality they have. What's happening on TikTok these days is at search visibility, where algorithmic happenstance allows people to go viral overnight for no rhyme or reason and for the most random occasions. For one, this TikTok that was viewed into the millions was literally 3 seconds long. The first second showed a picture of an old man, clearly accidentally activating his front-facing camera from his knee. The second showed a quick switch to the back camera showing his feet. And the third second, the screen went black. Maybe a man who accidentally downloaded TikTok and accidentally uploaded a video. It was his first and only video. There was nothing else there. He still had a generic username. He went viral overnight. He received lots of product sponsorships in the comment section. A lot of reporters were there asking if they could license his video. And as you can imagine, none of those comments were responded to. So goodness knows if he knows he was once upon a time an internet celebrity. Another example. Oftentimes, some people would find images and videos of other young, talented children and say, check out this person, they're great. It doesn't matter that consent was not negotiated. It doesn't matter if it was a YouTube video or a toddler on the bus. And somehow by the power of the algorithm, people are able to snowball their contacts and find the person in question, so much so that you literally rely on the wisdom of the crowd and their networking prowess to turn you into an overnight TikTok celebrity. And this stream also equally garners queries for sponsorship, for signing up to be a professional TikTok creator, and they generally go answered a bit better. But there are also circumventions of the algorithm that are happening. So young people are activating agency. For instance, on TikTok, one of the major challenges for navigating culture is that while you want people to know you and know the thing you produce, you also want them to constantly acknowledge you as the source, as the producer of this item. And this is really different from back in the day where we thought of memes, the cheeseburger memes, the cat memes, where the value and the success of the meme was simply that they spread. It wasn't important who the cat was or who the cat's owner was. It was simply important that it was disseminated far and wide. But when you're thinking about ownership and tracing and tracking and pulling people in and calling them out for not giving you credit, it goes against that mechanism and that ethos. And that back and forth has resulted in these ownership practices where folks on TikTok want the algorithm to make them viral, but the algorithm does not yet accommodate that smooth trajectory to linking back to their source content. There are also wonderful algorithmic practices where young people curate very, very, very specific subcultures. Case in point, in Australia, a very popular subculture in 2020 was young white boys hanging out in McDonald's, ordering vanilla cones and French fries, and claiming that that was an invention that they had to dip both and eat. Not knowing, of course, all of us who grew up in the 90s probably also did that. But the caption on top of the TikToks that you see in the second row would be something specific like, welcome to white boy Australian TikTok lovers of ice cream and fries. Feel free to stay a while if you belong to our interest group. Talk about a niche subculture or a micro niche subculture. Now, this may seem odd and bizarre, but when you're talking about young people who are then being very divisive about the intersection of their political leanings, or who are being very specific about their micro-sexualities and preferences and how they align with their body image and their gender identity, it can be very important then to find these specific alignments to find others like you. So these circumventions by young people remind us that yes, the algorithm has fed you my content, but if you do not interact with it, you might never see me again. So here is your chance, or forever lose this connection. Elsewhere in the space of TikTok, agency happens when there are people who bounce off the success of others. We have parallel economies where there is a whole ecology of people famous on TikTok for simply reacting to some other mainstream or original content that somebody else has produced. Take Kambi, for example, who posts a lot of compilations of people doing silly things and then stitches his face going, meaning, what is this even? Or Y Guy, who does the same thing, where he stitches a person doing something silly and just goes, why? Or Angry Man Reacts, who does the same thing, a very naughty thing that may have happened in society, and then he goes, angry face. Now, it may seem like these are very easy contents to produce, but believe me not, these are only 3 of hundreds of Black men in their late 20s to early 30s who have this as their characteristic caricature on TikTok. It is a very saturated market. So in order for people to know you by your hand gestures or your eyebrows or your nose, means you're here needing to split fine hair for people to visually recognize you and for the algorithm to pick up that you're really good in reacting to original contents that are fast picking up on the viral curve. Sometimes, though, very bad things happen, such as algorithmic hijacking. But I'm going to give you a good example of this today to give us a bit more hope and optimism in the world. Ipso Facto is a musician who has a song that went viral on TikTok with those suggestive lyrics, a very suggestive central tone. He originally meant it for it to be a song between two lovers, but he found out that a lot of TikTokers were using it for daddy-daughter point of view sexual play or sexual point of view videos. Some of it involving fetishization of children and sexualizing them and even pedophilia. And at a point of time when you click into his song, the top videos associated with him in that song by the algorithm's design were all those contents. So he came to TikTok repeatedly and called upon different groups of people, LGBT TikTok, skate TikTok, cosplay TikTok, K-pop TikTok, any group, please come, interact with my content, wrestle back the meaning of this song, attach it to anything you want, mix up the use of it, let it not be recognized as this one sole item, let it belong to the masses so it's not married to the gross point of view. And he was successful. In the end, after 2 weeks or so, if you were to search up his song on TikTok, the algorithm began to feed people such a variety of options that you wouldn't even have been able to tell the original meme or the original way it went viral in the first place. Finally, there is also call-out cultures and vocality. The way that algorithms work are time sensitive, especially in TikTok spaces. What this means is that if you're able to catch the attention of people and provoke them within a short span of time, you are rewarded by the mechanism that increases the radius of your amplification in the next round or the following round of visibility to more and more users. And so young TikTokers have had to come up with very interesting ways to dish out advice or talk about serious issues like politics and the economy. For instance, doing a viral dance and acknowledging that I need to do this dance to get your attention, please sign the petition in my bio. You might think about this as pop culture gone wrong, but these young people are seeing it as code switching or double speaking in order to get your attention that way. Block of text is popular, as is people who are doing more dances, more call-outs, and more skits to initially get your attention, then divert the runway to a social cause. Now, in all of these, we have young people who are working on their own, addressing an audience or addressing the algorithm. But one of the beautiful ways that TikTok also works is that it allows multiple people to speak to each other, as in the case of these collaborative duet chains. For those of us who are not on TikTok, a duet is usually when you have an original post or an original video, and then you superimpose your video next to the original, such that both videos are playing at the same time. If you make the audio match up, you could be duetting. In this case, this really cute frog was just really going at it at a very steady tempo. This drummer added the beat. Someone else duetted this and added piano. Someone else less talented duetted all of this and added dance moves. Now, this is really interesting and really fun, and cute animal TikTok has also evolved into a very lucrative economy on Spotify. But it's not as easy as it seems because these collaborative duet chains are also competitive. In that, I mean that for every time there is a frog, there are hundreds of duets. Which of these become then the most popular or most viral for people to select the most often so that it becomes this that gets duetted by other people? And likewise, when you reach stage 3, which of these duets from hundreds of people get to be the most popular such that it becomes the package here that is then duetted by other people? So it's a competitive relay here where people are trying to work out what is the culture of the group who is most likely to duet this? What is the flavor of people in this community who respond to it? How can I either oppose that flavor or show more of it so that they will choose me, select me, pick me, love me, and duet me? Some other times, though, the duets get a little bit absurd, such as in the case of this lady on top who says, can we just stop duetting people? And obviously the internet did not let her live because she was duetted to have an arm, a pig's belly, a dog's foot, feet, and I can't show the rest because it gets a bit graphic. But as you can see, it's a way of showing mockery to this lady who is trying to control this rather demotic process of people wanting to add their everyday flavor into the duets. That has been a small segment into where I live on TikTok that might have been oversharing. Now, because you have made the decision to talk about what cultures TikTok algorithms foster, we will skip the policy bits, and you now have to make the decision between Australia according to TikTok or Black Summer Australia. Australia according to TikTok is one way of doing ethnography where I've already groomed the algorithm to give me content, and I'm showing you screen grabs of what happens then after a session of grooming. What happens when I search Australia again? What information is fed back to me? Black Summer Australia is a collaborative project that I did with 3 other colleagues in a published article, where for a period of 2 summers, we studied what Australian cultural identity meant to young people on TikTok. This is the last bit for today. It's your case study. Please make your decision. Australia according to TikTok? There we go. Australia according to TikTok. How many of us here are not Australians by definition of citizenship? How many of us do not feel Australian by definition of culture or social cohesion? Okay, let's see what the internet thinks of Australia and let's see what TikTok thinks of Australia. We are entering TikTok, and for this, I'm going to introduce to you the systematic hashtag search. Now, in our paper, we argued that there is a lot of things fraught with the way we think about Australian cultural identity. And this has been long studied in cultural studies scholarship, actually by people just across the hallway for decades. But in brief, there is a stereotypical image or history of Australia according to the history books, and it systematically excludes some narratives. If we want to think about the colonizers or people in government as moderators, that will be very useful because they have a say in what gets to be etched out of history and what gets to be right in your face, in your feeds, literally in your textbooks or in your policies or on television. But the narratives are reflecting the ideology of the people in power. Not only do they neglect original history, they also neglect anyone who's inconvenient, like non-British, non-white immigrants, and becomes a barrier for change, a barrier for cultural diversity. So on TikTok, while we are able to see silos of color, sexuality, diversity, I don't think we should mistake that for multiculturalism. It could be an evidence of there being other cultures, but how much are they mixing? What is the potential for them to speak back to paragraph 1? Is it cross-culturing? Or is it multiple silos of cultures in that same space? Even if it's just that, is it all depressing? What is the value in all of these being visible to people who are negotiating Australian culture? I lived in Sweden for several years, and oftentimes when I tell people I live in Australia, 2 things come to mind. The first thing they say is, oh, your accent doesn't sound lazy. And I take that as a compliment. The second thing they like to imitate is, that's not a knife, this is a knife. So in the imaginary, they're only true Australians, the people who are very relaxed and slow, and the people who are apparently violent, aggressive, or out there in the wild, unkempt, very in touch with nature. I am not an outdoor nature person. So that causes people some confusion. But I imagine that if they were to explore Australia via TikTok today, they might get a very different picture. So after grooming my algorithm for a month, here is what TikTok has decided to tell me Australia looks like, according to all my efforts and according to my footprint, my metadata, the other people I'm connected with, my geolocation. When you first search Australia, the new indicators tell you it's a sovereign country. The first few posts tend to tell you about some of the influencers or TikTokers, if you can see the blue verified button here, who are prolific. And then they start to give you sponsored content. That's happened to be what's happening when the TikTok ecology becomes more and more professionalized. But after swiping through a few of those top posts, they also give you recommended searches from other people. And here you start to see something typically more Australian. There are thousands of posts of spiders of various sizes and people somehow still being very up close to them. There are thousands of posts about lots of people who shouldn't be nude or clad in little attire this early in the morning, that late in their age and life, or in venues where perhaps a bit more sun protection is needed. In the next feed, there are people who talk about how if you live in Australia, some parts of it are really pretty, but the unpretty parts you don't see. So the algorithm from the Demotic consensus here tries to tell you what tourism boards don't put in the airports or the billboards. And if you scroll even further, we get even more diversity, with people having mental breakdowns or crying on camera, with how they're coping in the reality of trying to adjust to Australia. Scroll even further, and you get to see a section of tabs. After the All tab there, a new tab from TikTok allows you to learn about the news. TikTok is not just for social media, it's also now a news network. Interestingly, there's just the one news channel that's recommended for you to follow. And interestingly, most of these posts that follow are all from the same company. I clicked on the second option given to me that says spider. And a new option from TikTok now uses AI technology in order to scrape and give you, the reader, summaries of context based on either A, very credible sources like Wikipedia, B, input from other users on databases and clouds like ChatGPT, or C, what all of these videos combined on TikTok tell us about common TikTok folklore regarding Australia. So based on common TikTok folklore with spiders, we understand that they are common, they can be found in bins, especially when found outside. And if you click on the search highlights, it gives you a full list of the AI and the third parties from which they draw these contents. So news today is the new update, and the search highlights gives us a bit more information about where the AI scrapes. Let's move on to the next one. There are other options that TikTok fed me today. Today, it decided that since I seem to be a person who's interested in culture, they want to tell me about a specific ethnic group, the Punjabis. Those are literal Punjabis just living life every day in Australia. There's also a brief that talks about who they are based on AI smart search. And then there are these facts that they pull from different AI databases to give me a summary of who they are. Right at the bottom, it gives me recommendations from other people in my network on who I can search for if I would like to find out a bit more. Things to keep in mind when you click on the View All. This information here is not immediately clear, but it's pulled from a combination of the posts from other people. So think about that as your TikTok community or TikTok folklore, verified against the databases, again, also pulled from people who have entered search phrases. Something else very relevant to culture is the option accents, also offered to me today. By the way, all of this was done by 6 a.m. this morning because I wanted to refresh my feed. Not much has changed, but accent was a new find. With accents, the first few are typical Australian words, all right, all right, all right. how Aussies sound like to each other, and this entire video is not legible to anybody, probably not even to an Australian. Tradies speak different Australian languages to each other. The search options are very interesting. There is a group of 8 here. And then these are people imitating different types of English and Australian accents, whether it's posh or neutral, etc. Their points of view from new immigrants and international students who have a whole conversation not knowing what's happening and never really knowing whether yeah is a yes or a no, and just standing there in disbelief. But in the helpful comment sections, believe it or not, people have come to the rescue of genuine questions, and in both videos, they give you tips on how exactly to identify these accents, on how exactly to decode these Australian slang words. Search even more, and it becomes offers for very famous K-pop stars, or famous Australian words, or other famous celebrities, and how they speak with their Australian accents. The third offer happens to be exactly the same from the first, which tells us there's not a lot there. Now, Aboriginals was very, very late, almost towards the end in an offer. The search highlights tell us that they have superior vision to the rest of humans, that they're the oldest population. Clicking on see more gives us all of the expanded hot tips from these folks. And only through scrolling a lot more do you get to see actual TikToks. So you can see here between Spider and Aboriginal Australians, there is a different level of intervention from how much preamble the app gives you before giving you what the consensus of the TikTok crowd feels you might want to be offered. Now, I've learned from various back channels and also from looking through TikTok policy that some of these are policy interventions in order to write misinformation, but others of these are intentional interventions in order to make visible some of this information and putting here correctly or approved narratives and discourses by these communities and these groups as consulted. Related to culture, possibly because I logged in and connected to Wi-Fi on a plane or in an airport, work visa was a new option offered to me today. Search highlights all the new visa regulations that allow you to move. Search highlights people talking about how to get employer-sponsored visas, how to get a job, my first job, what it's like at my job. More search options on how to get a job. Search options on how to live professionally on a working holiday. And search options on how to work in the mines. So these all happen then to be hot tips from people who have experienced what Australian life is like. And if you were to scroll through their videos and click on their usernames, you'll see that many of these people have branded their entire TikToks as in-betweeners, intercultural people, outsiders, living in Australia, TikToking about Australia. Handles like the mummy who lives here, or something, something, or key name, migration, something, something, migrant. And these indicate how they see Australia differently from how Aboriginals want to be perceived versus how foreigners may see Australia as a land of spiders. Now, there's also the option to go past top, because as you realize, so far, all of our options have been looking at the top tab and then going through the offers in terms of topics. But going past the top tab, you can also search through live, users, sounds, places, videos, hashtags. And over a month of grooming the algorithm, these options have been changing as they're offered to me. After a month, I can trace through my field notes why some of these come into play. I know, for instance, the live videos that are being fed to me are in such low numbers, only 5,000 people, only 7,000 people, because I searched this at 6 a.m. Sydney time. My algorithm is based in WA. Most people are asleep at 4. I know from my past research that because I follow a lot of academic Australian institutes and the Olympic team, because why not? They're giving me similar users to follow based on this interest, and also putting this as my first search result for my search, unlike someone else's. Because I have saved this sound in a previous watch, it comes up as the top find for me, even though it's not the top rank. Only 20,000 videos versus 135,000 videos. And this applies to place too. WA and Perth are ranked so highly despite having smaller numbers, because that's the backtrace of my footprint. And finally, Australia, being the verified account, has got its posts prioritized over other people who may have their view count 10 or 100 times more. So after having groomed my algorithm in my interest in how I like to enjoy Australia, this is how it has decided I should see Australia through the lens of TikTok, and how each of these posts enter me into a different culture or a different subculture in more amplified ways. That has been the end of your case study. Thank you for choosing. Thank you, moderator. I'll hand the time back to Ruben.
We have about 30 minutes for Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare the Slido in case someone wanna. Let's go. We're actually going to. So let me to share again. Wait. So for those of you also in Zoom, you can You can also join in there in slido.com and ask your questions. And if while you do that, we can go to the floor and Ben will. Whoever has a question, I can give you the mic. Should be on. Testing, yeah. So if you have a question on the floor, we can start with the floor and then I'll give you time to have questions.
All right. Hello. Okay. Thank you very much for your talk. It's very informative. Got lots of things written down. One of the things that occurred to me right from the beginning, let me get back to that. Okay. So yeah, when we're taking a look at these and you get into the platform and you get your algorithmically curated experience, is there an extent to which, given that these platforms sort of fundamentally are systems of moderation, even before the algorithm or after the algorithm starts shaping you for you, isn't there an extent to which, you would know better than I do, you're getting the TikTok experience even if you're not getting the same content, in the way that, for example, the algorithm on Facebook or Reddit or X would operate differently? You're getting the X experience even if you're not getting the same X content. Is it that way with TikTok, where there is a sort of company, a selection of content, a moderation system that's in there? Yeah, sorry, is there a sort of box for that content, even if it's not the same picture, same music, so on and so forth?
Sorry, what's your name?
Tim.
Tim, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. I can answer your question very technically. TikTok is geolocated and geolocked. So even though, okay, how many of us here use Netflix? You realize that when you're in a different country, your Netflix selection is different, and it clearly tells you you are now in country. That thing that you've been watching, too bad you can't access it here, but then here are all your other options. Something similar happens on TikTok. When you move across state lines, your TikTok ISP changes such that a block of contents are automatically offloaded from your stream or your experience despite your past footprints, whereas other types of content are recommended to you. And this is by nature of TikTok mostly working regionally rather than having a San Fran headquarters watered down. This has always been the way they work because historically, TikTok, being owned by ByteDance, originally based in China, had to operate in that way geo-locked. And so when they needed to expand in various markets, they did the same thing across the world. And therefore, when you say TikTok experience, the first experience is actually what is your national culture, which is a very gentle way of what is your government's politics? What do they allow and what do they not? The second way to answer your question is that in TikTok, they like to share that their company ethos is that it's a space that should spark joy, but it's also for learning. And the tagline they often share in corporate is, "This is TikTok for good," which means that in a lot of their campaigns and their materials here, even when they're talking about social movements, it's more of the feel-good personal politics social movements that you feel you can control. And as a young Gen Z person who may have joined the app in the 2019-2020 era, A lot of what was shaped was within your control. Social media and social movements felt like ethics because I can garner likes on a post. I may not be able to change policy or vote, but I can go out and protest. Small movements, but make you feel that you're being able to work within your reach. If you were to apply the same in other countries where there's actual war and conflict happening, we're not going to see that same slow, moderated, lukewarm sentiment. There is actual violent and graphic content. Sometimes it's allowed there as part of their ethos of showing news or citizen journalism. Other times it may have fallen through moderation. There's also a lot of conspiracy theory that some of these violent governments just have contracts or agreements with tech companies to allow that content to proliferate when they talk about war. The third response is, yes, everything that goes onto TikTok, like everything on the internet, is already pre-moderated. But what is so unique about this experience compared to many other platforms is that the moderation feels very visible. And at every time, the moderation is less for safety and more for your personal experience in order to keep you on the app for a longer time. To put this vaguely, within the confines of whatever I know confidentially, every time you work through a batch of TikToks, the machine recalculates how you have reacted to a dispatch and decides maybe out of 10 videos, you seem to react best to these 3 and not these 7. Let's double up this 3 and see if it was a fluke. Let's lessen those and see if you may be intrigued by them more and more. And they keep doing this for every same batch of videos over and over to determine your pattern and your tastes. Imagine you were at a sushi buffet and you are not allowed to pick your sushi. Every time the waitress comes, she only gives you 6 pieces of sushi. Based on what you take off your plate, the next time she replenishes the pieces that you take, and then she removes and substitutes the things you have left behind with the ones you have eaten. So she's learning your flavor. She's learning your desire. But every now and then she needs to give you the odd seafood or the odd fish because they need to clear it off the shelves. And she's just waiting to see, will you touch it? Will you touch it? Ah, you have. Will you touch it? Will you touch it? You won't. At least we've tried. So the TikTok experience is filtered in that way. But I would say even though a lot of the content now is filtered through foreign interference, filtering through young people and safety, because they are a commercial app, their filtering is mostly concerned with how do we keep your eyeballs there for longer, eventually get you to buy the things they're selling on live stream and TikTok shop.
Question in the floor was no question. Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, hi. Thank you for the speak. And I'm Tian. I'm a medical student here. I have a question on the collaborative dual chain, the trending event that you selected. So from what I know, that TikTok have a special team for organizing challenges and like those special effects that creator can use to produce their content. I'm not exactly sure that collaborative dual chain is an effect that TikTok produce, but it still doesn't change the question. The question is that like those trending can, let's say, driven by the platform, because platform provide them the tools, the effect, and challenges to how to push it to be a trend topic. So I'm wondering what's your opinion and like understanding of that? Is that some kind of moderation? Maybe I may use that word wrong. Anyway, that through challenges like effect tools in the creation of popular content. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks, Hien. That's a very interesting question. 4-parted answer. I'm going to start with the most glib and pithy one. Culture on TikTok is sponsored. If you really think about it, in order for the platform to continue operating in the country, as they have done with many countries within the Asia-Pacific region, and they're now negotiating with the likes of the US, in order for it to continue to operate in a specific country, they have had to agree to some of the government's demands. In order for it to be a profitable business, it's had to cooperate and partner with specific brands. that fit the national landscape. Again, bearing in mind that the algorithm is geolocated, so you're seeing very specific regional streams. So culture is sponsored in the sense that you are able to pay TikTok to promote a trend, just as you are able to pay Google or any web page to increase your search results in an SEO index. But it's more than that, because on TikTok, unlike feeling like you are seeing branded content, there are also folks who trend dances, challenges, catchphrases, and all of these can be part of branded campaigns without us even knowing. How do we then know it's a branded campaign? You might remember that back in the day, a lot of PR and marketing folks might go on Instagram, use a hashtag for a brand, and suddenly just use the platform for free advertising. It was only 10 years later that that Instagram decided, you know what, now you have to put a partnership label. And now you might have to pay a fee to be a creator account or to access these benefits. But TikTok has been clever. You have not been able to use the app for free publicity from day one. Content that seems to be promoting a brand overtly, if it doesn't meet the community guidelines, it gets taken down. If it somewhat meets the community guidelines, but it's still promoting a brand without it being a formal partnership that you pay TikTok to advertise, then it gets shadow banned, or it still shows up when you search for it, but it's not pushed widely or amplified as much in your FYP. So given that it's still, again, operated through what is amplifiable for brands and sponsorships, if you were to apply that to what I'm hoping I understand is your question, filters also work in the same way. Lots of creators make filters, as they do on many other platforms, but TikTok also has a creator rewards program that allows people who make filters to cash out based on the number of people who use your filter. So you may not be able to earn money from a dance, but you can get royalties from a song, or you can cash out in your fund for a filter that you've made. A lot of multiculturalism has definitely happened through filters because it is one of these spaces where there's social steganography. You get to navigate the cultural context and embed a lot of messages like basic Stuart Hall, and people who may not have the context might still use your filter. I don't know what watermelons mean, but these seem like really fun games. I'm going to use the watermelon filter. And then find out 2 weeks later that it's actually meant to stand and represent for people involved in a major conflict. I might use a filter that seems like I'm just mocking people with effeminate accents, not knowing to a news article tells me actually that's been a really sexist and misogynist way of representing minority groups. So filters factor into social media pop culture by disarming us, feeling like it's frivolous, feeling like it's mere pop culture, and the multiculturalism spreads in this way, despite not being despite not being able to be decoded, it disseminates, and that visibility reaches more and more people who might then have the potential to decode it. I hope I answered your question. I probably did not, but I'm happy to chat with you in the break.
Hi. Up here. Hi, thanks for that really interesting talk. My question has two parts. First of all, I'm interested in the social justice makeup tutorial that you mentioned, and I'm wondering why that video was taken down, like what motivated that decision. And I'm also wondering how common is that on TikTok, like those that kind of, do you think you called it call out cultures or that kind of TikTok activism? My second question I have is about the slide where you had John Burge's Ways of Seeing on the left and the book about machine vision on the right. And I'm sort of curious about what you're saying there. So has machine vision now produced a gaze that has superseded what John Burge said in that book? And I quoted from him last week in my lecture. So I'm interested in that shift from Burge's ways of seeing and the gaze and the male gaze, female gaze to machine vision, and what exactly is machine vision, and if that is just a simple evolution or is actually a little bit more complicated that in terms of old and new media. Thanks.
Thank you, Fiona. First question is easier to answer. Second question, a bit more nuanced. So it's not going to be factual, but it also contains my own opinion. I hope that's okay. So first question, with the social justice makeup tutorial, why the takedown? Well, she was talking about the genocide of Uyghurs, Muslim Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And given that at that time, ownership of TikTok was still under ByteDance, still based in China, there was conflict of interest, or at least that was the folklore circulating, because it was several days before her content was reinstated, and ByteDance said it was a machine error. But obviously, people who are in the know or people with conspiracy theories and who are able to link the source content with the politics of the country in which the company is hosted in are able to make that link. However, since then, I think there have been some improvements because if we go back to geolocated silos and streams, these contents are available for us to search if we are outside of that geo-blocked region. So someone who's based in China might not be able to search and get that as a search result, whereas someone who's doing that at the exact same time in a different country will be able to see that. I guess that's a bit of an improvement. It's still part of TikTok's policy where they don't take down content unless it's absolutely necessary, but they can reduce visibility, which is why there's folklore that the algorithm can penalize us all or punish us all. It's not really about your content staying up. It doesn't matter if it stays up if nobody sees it anyway. So that's what they're working with, pleasing the algorithm. How common is call-out culture? It depends on our definition. If we are very, very generous with the definition of call-out culture, and we are happy with it just being pointing out rather than seeking redress, rather than seeking correction, then it happens at a very high instance. We must remember that the history of TikTok popularizing outside of East Asia and Southeast Asia coincided with young people doing climate change marches around the world, with bushfire summer here in Australia, with young people experiencing lockdown and then a lot of online aggression and racism. So many young people who came onto TikTok at the mainstream stage in 2019 entered that space with a bone to pick, using it as a social justice app. And that was the original culture that enticed them. So there's still a very high level of that sort of call-out culture. But if we were to assess the social justice that's happening there, a lot of it is gesticular activism. Look, this is bad. Look, cancel that. And then what? You have pointed to the thing, you have raised awareness and visibility, but it doesn't really always go to stage 2 of locating the source, seeking redress, correcting the wrong, giving the correct information. And it's by design of TikTok that this sometimes happens because people who participate in call-out cultures go viral. The algorithm rewards you. And so even if I may not know a lot about an issue, it serves me well to jump on the bandwagon to also call out a company, despite me maybe drinking a drink from that same brand a few rows down. So the coherence of my social justice ethos and my personal ethics may not be very tight or neat on TikTok because people are people are encouraged, enticed, a stronger word, seduced to put out these contents in order to attract people who might be angry about a hot topic within a very short span of time. Your second question, where ways of seeing allowed us to think about how we see based on our habitus, our demographic, our training. Jill Walker-Ratberg's work with machine vision and the second one, I think made a very interesting argument that oftentimes our habitus online is by design of what the platform ethos is. This is why we say things like TikTokers are like that, Redditors are like that, 4chaners are like that, flat earthers are like that. We summarize groups and communities of people just based on the platform they are on because we know there are normative cultures there. And that sometimes also links to the ownership or the owners of the platform who may allow these things to happen, who may change their policies and allow leeway for some of these wrong to flourish. But I also think that with machine vision, the ways of seeing now allow us to go deep into the microcosm. It's no longer just saying, here is a demographic that shares a certain gaze. It's also going deep to look at individual people and then falsely sometimes extrapolating. I may see one young Asian girl doing this on TikTok. And because TikTok keeps feeding me the same contents based on my footprint, I come away with the impression that all young Asian girls must like this thing because it's only showed me that flavor from a very specific rabbit hole or silo. So ways of seeing, I feel, is shifted from group habitus to habitus of the platform or your normative culture. It's also forcing us to extrapolate or see things when they're sometimes not there, or to over-amplify what we believe is there. There is some false sense of security for subcultures or groups in the fringes that feel that they are being seen. There's also a false sense of security that visibility is enough without seeking actual action. But it goes back to your first great question about social justice. To what extent are we defining what is palatable or acceptable on the app? Remembering, of course, a lot of these are young people who might have limited resources, who are just learning, or sometimes seduced by the algorithm to participate without really fully knowing.
Go to Adrian's questions, and then we go to, I think, Olga. Okay. So Adrian asked, it's a boomer question, but if TikTok is about selling people, why is it so successful, much more successful than other platforms? So.
Thank you, Adrian. Not boomer at all. TikTok is about selling people a thing, maybe not stuff. I like to think that TikTok is about selling ideology, and it depends on who the client is. If the client is the government, then the ideology might be, what politics do we feel? What sponsored content do we put out in conjunction with the zoo or other public ministries or other public services? If the client is a company who's selling you makeup, I might not even feature the makeup there at all. I might be selling you a lifestyle, a ethos, a brand image. The idea of TikTok becoming so successful is that it never really gives you the message straight in your face, despite the thing being straight in your face. You often feel that you're getting a peek into someone else's life, or that you're part of a community, or that this is simply viral and trending, so it's magically fed to you. And it doesn't make us think that this is all advertising, but in reality, it is. We need to move away from thinking of advertising as something we exchange products and money for, and advertising as something that shapes our worldview, how we see things, how we perceive people, and maybe even the way that people in political science have been studying things like micro-exposure. There is this Chinese idiom I learned of recently of putting a frog in a pot of water and then dialing it up by boiling the water slowly, and the frog doesn't know it's being boiled alive. Sometimes that exposure for people going down conspiracy theories or becoming extremists online is because the algorithm dials up so slowly each time. So you never actually know that you're falling deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole until you come out and see someone in a different pot and realize, hey, that frog is swimming in ice. What's happening here? It's hard to keep your perspective when you don't often get to see what's in the other pot, because the algorithm very neatly ushers you down a very deep rabbit hole.
Thanks for the great talk. There was a survey of Gen Zs recently, and 50% of respondents said they wish TikTok had never been invented. And it was only about 15% for YouTube and Netflix and the internet generally. X was really high as well. But I guess my question is, why do you think that's the case? And it's so high for TikTok? And to what extent is the algorithm a factor here? Is that young people like being creative, they like the idea of what TikTok could be, but they hate what the algorithm is doing to their content, or they hate that they have to game the algorithms. Just watching, listening to your talk, it just felt like so much of what people were doing seemed so exhausting to have to game these algorithms. Do you think that's a factor in why so many Gen Z respondents would say that they wish it was never invented?
This could be a book. That's a really good question, Ross. It's hard to go a bit deeper without knowing what segment of Gen Z we are speaking to. So let me try and extrapolate. If we talk about Gen Z in the milieu, in this temporality, they are literally the young people who are in a late stage capitalism, where we're in a perma crisis, where their value is considered upon what they can offer to the world. Everything that they do can potentially be a product, whether they're on social media or taking a video or making a dance. And so it feels exhausting because this is the reality that they're living in. I often ask my first year undergrads, how many of you think you're influencers? And like only a few shy people do. And then I ask, how many of you have Googled yourselves or edited your account before starting uni, or made sure your high school teacher finds your fake Instagram or your fake Snapchat, but not your actual one? And then suddenly everybody's hands go up. And it's a mark that they are practicing influencer logics or creator logics. And it's simply that the logics that used to be a professional business that people could get cash money for are now expected from everyone in society, people in this room included, when you have a new publication or you want to sell a course. So some of that fatigue is being baked into this milieu that they are in this time. Now, without knowing much more about the Gen Z I also reckon that they wish it was not invented. If we think about the political climate of this time, it's more and more difficult to get people, all the frogs out of the pots. So it's more and more difficult to be able to speak across silos and across difference. If you belong to such a micro minority sector or subculture with so many intersections, and I also multiply my identification with many segments, how much middle ground can we build to have a conversation? What is the Gen Z equivalent of complaining about universities collapsing or the weather looks nice? If you live in such different social realities, it's getting harder to reach out to each other. And I think that fatigue also has to do with the fact that they're living in very fragmented, though accessible spaces, because it takes effort to come out and learn and find that space. So it's easier to just hang out with your people.
Thank you so much for your talk, Crystal. This was like Bandersnatch. This is the first time I'm seeing something like a choose your own adventure. So fantastic. I have a question. So I wanted to go back to the first question that you left us with, which is whose narrative is the most visible? And oftentimes lately I've been seeing a lot of scholars making assumptions that just because someone's narrative is visible, and we can talk about users that represent certain marginalized identities, that it's hegemonic. So how do we distinguish visibility and hegemony in a platform context? Thank you.
That is such a good question, Olga. I hope you write that book someday. Okay, let's answer this depending on who we are. As the platform, hegemony is in the people who control the access. We can see from the recent court hearings, if we can call them that politely, the way it's been unfolding in the US, that's with regards to where these platforms are allowed to operate. So we're talking about political power at the base level of accessibility to these platforms. If we're talking about hegemony in terms of power, in terms of who gets to multiply, extend, buy bodies, buy labor, then we're talking about money. Hegemony here is about which platforms are able to churn out the most income, because even if they're bad, and even if the CEO is a terrible man, the brands need to rely on these platforms for their livelihood. It's very difficult for brands to say, get off Facebook, because increasingly a lot of people are not getting advertising from television or newspapers. It's whatever the feed shows them. And all of us might not remember that once upon a time there were no ads on Facebook, but we have accepted it as part of this digital recognition, according to colleagues Nora Draper and others. So that's the one catch-all for everybody. If we ask hegemony in terms of who gets to control the voicing, who gets to push back, who gets to withhold, who gets to suppress, technically the power is in the moderators. The way TikTok works is that in the first instance, the moderation goes through AI and machine vision. But if there are those that are flagged by users repeatedly, actual human moderators decide that. But if you really think about it, and if we know about the history of Southeast Asian moderators who work in very poor conditions and suffer terribly from mental health, they are all schooled into a specific regime by the platform in what can be acceptable and what cannot. In the case of TikTok, it goes back to being geolocated. It goes back to the country. So I know it sounds really strange to make the assertion that governments and countries hold power, given that they're banning TikTok because of its harms. But bear in mind that the fact that big tech is involved in these negotiations in the governments, the fact that they have split into 5-10 different headquarters, unlike their predecessors who are just in one, is a sign of the splintering of the market in the future to come. In the past, we used to say, here are all the Silicon Valley apps, and all my HDR students would lament because every time they give a presentation, they have to say, WeChat is the Chinese WhatsApp. Weibo is the Chinese Twitter. There is a baseline that you assume the audience knows, and then you have to say, minus the variation, that's basically the same, so let's continue, right? TikTok changed the game there because it collected the features of what was popular in quote-unquote Global South across Southeast Asia. the app became so successful that it became mainstream worldwide, alongside many other apps that are doing well. KakaoTalk from Korea, yes, still mostly used by Koreans, but also being used by Korean brands to reach people abroad. So people are using these translation features in order to extend their reach into purchasing because of the Hallyu wave. If we think about WeChat, we used to think about it as an app you cannot survive without. And post-COVID, when a lot of cities have pivoted to digital money, when a lot of transactions internationally have to take place there, it's also become the app that consolidates people's experiences. So in the long run, this is a nice shift because in the words of Koichi Iwabuchi or Christina Yano, we're not talking about a center and then like periphery that decenters or disrupts. It's not like US market, China, or Japanese market, rest of world. We're now seeing this proliferation of many micro markets, some of them consolidating, a few other major markets. And the wonderful thing is that all of them are wrestling in this space where sometimes they have nothing to lose. If you don't want to allow us there, that's fine. Users find ways to circumvent and they teach each other how to access us. Or we'll come up with a newer, cleaner version like TikTok's Lemonade, which is very similar to Xiaohongshu or Red, a sanitized version that has less of that user-generated controversy and focuses more on the Instagram aesthetics that people are more comfortable with. So the hegemony for me that's changing is this disruption of what Silicon Valley is, what San Francisco means to people. Why is it that people are now flocking to Shanghai or Shenzhen to get their training? Why are they flocking to South Korea to get their parts? And living in this part of the world, it's very satisfying to see.
We have one more question. We have time for maybe your question and maybe one more, and then we're gonna have to leave it there.
Thank you for the chance. Me again. I want to follow up with Adrian's question. So there was a lot of TikTok clone is like emerging and also shut down. So I give two examples. Sorry, I write it like in a way that is not grammatically correct. But there was a lot of TikTok clone. And another example I want to mention is that there was one called Wizkid, which is operate in Africa, which African market is not especially TikTok's focus. They don't really like work there, but it worked there. But anyway, they don't really focus on African market. Even in that case, Wizkid is partially shut down maybe and like cannot compete with TikTok. So my question is like, why is successful and other is not successful? Like,
I think the first thing we need to define is who is the user. You know, the typical hype cycle curve, you have your early adopters, they will try everything and decide whether to stay or go. You've got the people who will go when the curve has peaked, and then the left behinds who will sign up on the app after everybody has already been there. Now, this is mostly driven by two things, either FOMO, the fear of missing out, or need, when society has integrated this app into its daily functions that you need to go onto the app. If not, you lose out, you fall behind, you may not be able to operate well in society, in your job, etc. Now, in terms of FOMO, the fear of missing out, think about the apps that predated TikTok that parasited off its features, whether it's YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels. It's basically the same concept, but they are retaining their user base, realizing that that is the FOMO aspect, the short video part is missing. And likewise, TikTok is realizing, yeah, we're also losing some of our market. People like the carousels from Instagram. Let's do that. People like live streaming in the likes of Twitch. So let's do that. There's an exchange there. FOMO allows these apps to grow. It's a very basic fundamental need for attracting people or for people who've got inertia, who don't really want to go onto a new app and learn a whole new thing and fight for a username. It's great when an app you're already familiar with gives you that feature. But the second thing that's very specific to TikTok is how it became indispensable really quickly. You might remember that in 2019, it was so indispensable that the WHO used it as its first and main platform for reaching young people and getting them to reach their parents and grandparents about misinformation. And for the first time in a long time, it was a tech company realizing we're working with a health organization and talking about misinfo and misguidance, not of minors and young people, but of middle-aged and elderly people. So it was recognizing that because of the legacies of people going onto TikTok for social justice endeavors, they can also be leveraged as mediators in this space to bring this elsewhere. We see that TikTok's been used in the elections. If other parties don't use it, you're missing out. These days, I think many of us may be familiar with Gen Z marketing on TikTok. It's where mostly in very pristine, posh places like British museums or like automobile companies, you've got a very senior citizen in their 60s or 70s using Gen Z slang like, hey girl, this is it, you slay. And they're like, what is happening? Clearly this script was written by a Gen Z person. And if they're going through all of that in order to make the meme workable for them, it tells you how essential TikTok is in the marketing ecology. Now, if we were to learn from Douyin, which is the predecessor of TikTok, where all the initial new features are first tested, we know that it was very important for live streaming and live shopping. TikTok has introduced live shop several years later. We know it's important for a small business to be able to click and go directly into their shop, like you used to do with Instagram. TikTok also did that later. So by following in the pathway of Douyin, we can see how TikTok is increasingly becoming essential to different demographics of people, such that you cannot just claim it to be a young person app anymore, and you have to get on with it in order to teach, to research, to talk to someone producing business, to speak to your clients, etc. So FOMO and it becoming mainstream in society.
Hello. I hope it's a quick question. So something that I found very interesting in the presentation is the relationship between the user and the algorithm, right? So there's one example that you give where the people are actively trying to fight against the algorithm by trying to game the system. But there's also, I wanted to ask about the other side of it, where there could be perceivably a more like symbiotic, collaborative relationship between the person and the algorithm. And the reason why I asked this is because recently I've been seeing this trend on TikTok where a bunch of people see like this like super out of pocket video, and in the comments they go, I built this For You page brick by brick, like trying to like show that I put so much effort into curating my For You page that it looks like this now. And you also mentioned that in your research, you do a lot of grooming for your TikTok to curate it to show you the things that you want to see. So I just wanted to ask a little bit about what do you think of like people's agency and control over the algorithm and how TikTok has shifted that?
So I think the short answer to that is in recognition of how successful young people have been at circumventing the algorithm or pleasing it or grooming it, TikTok recently released a new feature called Refresh Your Algorithm, which means all of your past footprints can be wiped out and you get a brand new For You page. And if a tech company makes a decision like that that affects billions of users worldwide, it is co-opting from the ground and a sign that whatever the young people have initiated and started is very successful, to answer your question.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for your talk.